Welcome, everyone. So thank you so much for joining us. This is our 11th COVID conversation. We've been doing this for almost a year and a half now. I'm Dr. Eric Ball. I'm a pediatrician with the CHOC Primary Care Network down here in Orange County, California. And we're so excited to join you today to talk about preparing California for infant and toddler COVID-19 vaccines. Two amazing speakers with us today. Returning champions who have been here before, Dr. Yvonne Maldonado from Stanford and Dr. Robert Schechter from the California Department of Public Health. This is in a Zoom webinar format, so all of your lines should be automatically muted. There's a question and answer box on the bottom. If you guys have questions for Drs. Maldonado or Schechter, please put them in the question and answer box. We will have a very long question and answer period towards the end, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. And then, as always, these webinars will be recorded and will be posted to our website at the California Immunization Coalition, as well as our YouTube page. You could also see our old COVID conversations on those sites. Next. There's a Q&A box. Next. We want to thank our sponsors for tonight's webinar. We've really expanded our reach, and we really appreciate everyone coming together on such short notice to put this webinar together. We are from the California Immunization Coalition. We also have sponsors from the California Department of Public Health. If you can go back one. The American Academy of Pediatrics in California, and the California Academy of Family Physicians. We want to make sure that all people who are taking care of children in California, including the AAP and the CAFP, are involved in this conversation. So thank you for joining us and for sponsoring us. Next. Tonight, we will be moderating as usual. Again, I'm Dr. Eric Ball. I'm a primary care pediatrician at the CHOC Primary Care Network, and I'm the co-chair of the Emerging Issues Committee at the California Immunization Coalition. And I'm joined by Dr. Pia Panaraj, who's the Associate Professor of Pediatrics at the Keck School of Medicine at USC. And she also works in the Division of Infectious Diseases at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. And she's the other co-chair of the Emerging Issues Committee. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Pia to introduce our speakers.
Great. Thank you very much, Eric. I have the pleasure today of introducing Dr. Yvonne Maldonado. She is a professor and chief of the Division of Infectious Diseases at Stanford University School of Medicine. She's also the Senior Associate Dean for Faculty Development and Diversity at Stanford. She's led a number of NIH, CDC, USAID, Gates Foundation, and WHO-funded domestic and international pediatric vaccine studies, as well as studies in prevention and treatment of perinatal HIV and infection in the US, India, Mexico, and Africa. She's currently the chair of the American Academy of Pediatrics Committee on Infectious Diseases and the AAP liaison to the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices. So thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Pia. And Eric, it's really wonderful to be here tonight. And thank you to all of you who are online. I know it's a wonderful summer evening and you could be doing a lot of other exciting things with your families, but this is a really important topic. And I want to make sure that we get a chance to cover all of it. So I'm going to jump right in and then also let my co-speaker, Dr. Schechter, come in after me. So I want to really focus today on the pediatric COVID-19 vaccines with a real emphasis primarily on the under 6-year-olds, because that's the group that we really don't have any history of. It's just, as you know, we just saw those data presented last week from the FDA and the CDC and got our recommendations over the weekend. And I'll go through all of that with you and we can then take questions at the end. So if I could have the next slide, please. I just wanted to update all of you regarding the epidemiology, and this is from the American Academy website. So aap.org has a really nice link to the current status of disease in kids, as well as a link to vaccines in kids. And you can see from last week's report that we are in the mid, we're kind of ending our 4th wave of disease. And I wonder if we could turn that off. It's a little bit distracting. I'm not sure if we can do that. But we are in the end of the Omicron surge now, but we're starting to get a little bit of a plateau with our Omicron subvariants. And you can see there on the upper left is the pediatric cases over the course of the pandemic. And then on the right, you see the pediatric cases relative to adult cases. And you can see that overall, our children have represented between 20 and 25% of cases over the course of the pandemic relative to adults. And at this point, we have seen over 13.5 million children with infection for a rate of about 18,000 per 100,000 children. So pretty high, again, high rate of infections. So we know, and all of you know, that children are getting infected, contrary to what a lot of people have talked about, and they are getting hospitalized and unfortunately are dying as well. So if I can get the next slide, we can see the number of hospitalizations. So since the beginning of the pandemic, among children under 18, we've seen over 43,000 children hospitalized with and for COVID-19. And one of the other arguments we hear about is, well, the children are just coming in for other reasons. They're not coming for COVID, but there is a recent CDC study showing that at least during the Omicron pandemic, at least 85% of the children hospitalized were coming in for COVID symptoms, not just with COVID asymptomatic disease. And then we've also seen, unfortunately, over the course of the pandemic, over 1,500 deaths. So this is in the top 4 to 5 causes of death for children in every age group to the age of 18. So clearly an important disease. Next, please. So what can we do other than non-pharmacological interventions? Well, one of the things that we've been so excited about is that since May of last year, we have had vaccines for children available for the 12 to 17-year-olds starting last May. Oh, by the way, I'm not moving that cursor around. I don't know why it's jumping around like that. So sorry about that. We've, since November of this year, we have seen we've had vaccines available for 5 to 11-year-old children as well. Unfortunately, so that's the good news. The not great news is that only about 59% of kids 12 to 17 have been vaccinated, and only about 29% of kids 5 to 11 have been vaccinated. And on the right, you can see in green the trajectory of vaccinations over time. And you see that most of the vaccinations for kids under 7, all kids of all age groups so far, have really been at the beginning of EUA approval, and they've really tapered off dramatically. So this is something that we really want to emphasize, all of us in the pediatric community, all of us in the public health community, to really emphasize the need for vaccination in children to prevent serious disease and death in children, as well as potentially long COVID symptoms. Next slide, please. And so let's talk about the most recent exciting data. And that is that last week on Tuesday and Wednesday, the FDA reviewed COVID vaccines for children, specifically for the Moderna vaccine. On Tuesday, they looked at 6 to 17-year-olds. And then on Wednesday, they looked at Pfizer and Moderna vaccines for under 6-year-old children. So, and then on Friday and Saturday of last week, we went over the indications for Pfizer and Moderna vaccines for the under 6-year-olds. And on Saturday, we heard from CDC that they had approved these vaccines. We have clinical guidelines, which I'm going to show you. They just were released yesterday. So we know again that on the 14th, the VRBPAC, which is the vaccine review biologics, the vaccines and related biological advisory committee reviewed the vaccines, and they all voted unanimously to support the vaccines. And similarly, this weekend, last Friday and Saturday, CDC voted unanimously as well to approve vaccines for the 6-month to 5-year-old age group. Now, tomorrow, we're actually in the middle of CDC meetings again this week. Today, we were talking about Prevnar, MMR, influenza, and other diseases. But tomorrow, we're going to go over the Moderna vaccine for the 6 to 17-year-olds. So I won't be able to really talk about that yet because we haven't actually gone through that. We'll do that tomorrow. And I'm sure Drs. Ball and Panaraj will be able to update you on that later. Next, please. So the CDC update from the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, as I mentioned, reviewed the data, voted unanimously to endorse both vaccines with no preference for either vaccine. Next, please. And here is the status of the CDC recommendations as of yesterday. So now for children 6 to 4 years of age, we have the Pfizer vaccine in a 3-dose primary series and the Moderna vaccine in a 2-dose primary series. And for 5-year-olds, we also have the 2-dose primary series for both groups, because the Pfizer trials included children under 6 and the Pfizer trials included children under 5. So you have 2 vaccines available in the 3-dose versus 2-dose, and that's going to be a little more complicated, which we'll cover in a bit. For the 5-year-olds, a 2-dose primary series is available for both vaccines. And then for the 6 to 17-year-olds, we have the Pfizer 2-dose series, but not yet recommended by the CDC for Moderna. And we'll talk about that tomorrow, and likely that will be approved as well. Next, please. And in addition, the AAP has been very busy issuing statements, putting up FAQs, and actually we have a statement on COVID vaccines in infants, children, and adolescents, which was released in a pre-publication format on the 18th. So you have that available, and there's the source and the link if you want to take a look at that. It's also available on the AAP website. Next, please. So let's talk a little bit about the data. So we know that there was efficacy data shown for both Pfizer and Moderna for young children. Now, the Pfizer data for 6-month-olds to 4-year-olds included efficacy endpoints that were split up into 2 groups, 6-month to 23-month-olds and 2 to 4-year-olds. And we saw that the efficacy there was 75% for the younger children, 6 to 23 months, and 82% for 2 to 4-year-olds, for an overall efficacy of 80%. Now, the problem with that's great news, but the problem with that is this was based only on 10 symptomatic COVID cases, and the minimum statistical established number that CDC and Pfizer wanted to use to establish firm efficacy was 21 cases. So they haven't gotten to that point yet. And therefore, efficacy is really is helpful to understand trends, but it's not statistically relevant at this point. But it is good to see that at least even in non-statistical form, that the vaccine efficacy endpoints look to be robust. And in addition, when we looked at vaccine effectiveness for the Pfizer vaccine in older children, we know that as by comparison, vaccine effectiveness 2 months after the 2nd dose in older children was 28%, and after the 3rd dose was 42%. So we can expect in these younger children, hopefully the effectiveness and efficacy will be at least that, and potentially higher. So we'll wait to see more around effectiveness. Next slide, please. So the other issue that was looked at now is what we call immunobridging. And I think you're all familiar with this. In most cases, for most other vaccines, you really can't collect enough cases of disease in placebo and vaccine recipients to calculate efficacy. So we generally use immunobridging studies, which really measure the immunogenicity and compare that to the immunogenicity among established groups. And in this case, the immunogenicity was really established relative to older children and adults 16 to 25 years of age. And the immune responses had to be within a set non-inferiority criteria. That means they had to be at least equivalent to 18 to 25-year-olds. I'm sorry, 16 to 25-year-olds. And the good news here was that with the 2-dose studies, as we recall, 6 to 23 months olds did meet immunobridging criteria, but 2 to 4-year-olds did not. And therefore, back in February, the FDA and the Pfizer decided to not look for a 2-dose approval, but move ahead and do a 3-dose study. So those of us, including me, we did the Pfizer pediatric trials. We were a pediatric site here. We moved ahead and included a 3rd dose study that was blinded, double blinded and placebo controlled. And the 3-dose criteria were put forward, and those were the data that were reviewed last week. So again, just to note that here, you see that the 2 to 4-year-olds did not meet the antibody or immunobridging criteria for non-inferiority. Next slide, please. And so because of that, we do see a 3-dose, we do have a 3-dose regimen, which I'll go over with you in a bit. Now, the other important thing to note here is that for immunocompromised children, the series is very similar, but includes additional criteria for children who are immune compromised. And that is for children 6 months to 4 years of age, they should get a 3-dose series for Pfizer. The first and second doses are separated by 3 weeks, and the second and third are also separated by 8 weeks, just like the healthy non-immunocompromised children with no, I mean, this is actually, sorry, this is for the non-immunocompromised kids. And for children 5 to 11, for immunocompromised kids, they should receive a 3-dose series with a booster dose. And this is because we know that immunocompromised kids may not respond well, and so they should get 3 doses. The first and second dose is separated by 3 weeks, and the second and third dose is separated by at least 4 weeks, with a booster dose administered at least 3 months after completion of the primary series. Now, for the Moderna vaccine, for 6 to 5-year-old immunocompromised kids, they should also receive a 3-dose primary series, with the first and second doses separated by 4 weeks, and the second and third doses separated by at least 4 weeks. And no booster is currently recommended. That will be continue to be followed, and we may update that as we get more data. Next slide, please. Now, this is a really important issue because with Omicron, as we know, many people got infected, including young children. And many people have said, well, I don't think my child needs to get vaccinated, or I don't need to get vaccinated because I've already been infected. But we know from community data that people who recently that have been infected actually have a higher chance of reinfection compared to people who were infected and were vaccinated. So we know that even if people have had Omicron, they should get their children should be immunized anyway. But people who are recently infected may consider delaying their primary dose or their first or second booster by 3 months from symptom onset or positive test. And this is based on data from adults that has shown that increased time between infection and vaccination may result in an improved immune response. And we also know that there can be some protection from the infection for at least about 30 days, although again, the data is not very robust. So again, the main issue here is to remember that everybody should be vaccinated, even if they've been previously infected, although they can wait up to 3 months, although 1 month I think would be, in my own personal opinion, I would not wait longer than maybe a month or so. Next slide. Now, this is another issue that's important because, as we know, the Pfizer vaccine is a 3 microgram dose for children under 5, and a 10 microgram dose for 5 to 11-year-olds, and a 30 microgram dose for 12 to 17-year-olds. Whereas for the Moderna vaccine, the Moderna is 25 micrograms for 5 and under, 50 micrograms, and we don't have a recommendation yet for children from 6 to 17 yet, so I can't really talk about that. However, what we need to remember is that if somebody is going to be on the cusp of 4 years of age, becoming 5 years of age, you should just remember something relatively simple, is that the children should receive the recommended age-appropriate vaccine dosage based on their age on the day of vaccination. So if you're 4 today, you get the 4-year-old dose, which is 3 micrograms. If you're coming back for your second dose of Pfizer and you are turning you're 5, then you can get the 5-year-old dose, which is 10 micrograms. You can do that, but you don't have to. And it's really up to you and the pediatrician to decide. Now, here's the other issue for Pfizer vaccine. Children who will go from 4 to 5 years of age, Pfizer has actually allowed those children to use either dosage series. So they can either do the 2-dose primary series using the Pfizer product authorized for 5 to 11-year-olds, or the 3-dose series initiated with Pfizer for either the under 5-year-olds or the over 5-year-olds. So it's a little complicated, and I'll show you a cartoon showing you what the choices are in a bit. Next slide. But the main thing to remember here is that you can default to giving the child the vaccine dose based on the age, the day that they come in for their vaccine. That's the easiest thing to do. So children who turn age 4 to 5 can receive, this is one scenario, they can get the second dose. So they can opt to get the 5-year-old dose, which is 10 micrograms, even though they are still 4. But then they get the second, and then they can get their second dose at 10 micrograms, which also is the 5-year-old dose. Next slide. The other scenario is that the 4-year-old who's going to be 5 can get the 4-year-old dose, which is the maroon cap, or 3 micrograms. And they can either get that same 4-year-old dose on their second visit and their third visit, or they can get the older age dose, the 10 micrograms. So you have a choice either way. Next slide, please. And I think Rob is going to talk about this in a bit, so I will skip this. It has to do with some additions to the label for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, so I'll skip that for now. And this is just a graphic. It's a bit complicated, and I'm not going to run through it all, but I want you to know that it's available and we can send these slides out. But the idea here is that you see that the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine and the Moderna vaccine are either 3 doses for Pfizer for 6 to 4 years of age, or 2 doses for 6 to 5 years of age. And for 5 and older, you see here that you can actually get up to 4 doses, because you actually can get a booster if you're older than 5 for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. And you can get a booster if you're 18 and older of the Moderna, but you really can't get a booster yet for Moderna because it hasn't been approved yet for the 6 to 17-year-olds. Next slide, please. And this is an even more complicated slide, which I'm not going to go through right now, but I want you just to know that there is an algorithm for you to take a look at for people who are moderate to severely immunocompromised. And the addition here is that you will get you can still get for 5 to 11-year-olds, they can get a 3-dose series. And that actually helps boost their immune response if they're immunocompromised, plus a booster. And they can also, if they're 12 and older, can get a second booster at least 4 months after the first booster. And the first booster is given at least 3 months after the primary series. And you see for Moderna, that's only true if you're 18 and older. So really, the options for children between 6 and 17 years of age are Pfizer, but you can have up to 5 doses, so 3 primary plus 2 boosters if you're immunocompromised. And let's see, I think I might have one more slide. Re-vaccination, again, these are, I won't go through these in detail, but there are there is guidance for re-vaccination if somebody is a recipient of stem cell or CAR T therapy. It should be re-vaccinated at least 3 months after the transplant, and re-vaccination can also be considered for children who are receiving some B-cell depleting therapies. Next, please. And with that, I will stop. And I just wanted to, again, remind you that these slides will be available for you to have. And you can also look at the CDC website, and also AAP will have these recommendations as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Dr. Maldonado. We're going to take questions at the end after Dr. Schechter speaks. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Rob Schachter. Dr. Schechter has been medical officer with the California Department of Public Health Immunization Branch since 2003. He's worked in several disciplines, including immunization program implementation and management, vaccine safety and post-marketing surveillance, vaccine communication, health information technology, and vaccine research and development. He has had managerial and consultative roles for CDPH's immunization programs, amongst the largest, including the California Vaccine for Children's program. CDPH has been responsible for over 500,000 doses of influenza vaccine to local health departments, and also has been spearheading our COVID vaccine response in California. Dr. Schechter is a proud member of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and he is going to speak to us more about COVID-19 vaccines for infants and toddlers. Thank you so much, Dr. Schechter.
Thank you, Dr. Ball. Can you hear me?
Yes, you sound
great. Good evening, everyone. And thanks to Dr. Maldonado for laying out a powerful case for the importance of COVID-19 immunization. And this is a call for you as routine immunizers, whether pediatricians or family physicians. If you've already been giving your doses to the 5 to 11-year-olds and the adolescents, to try and help you prepare for the under 5s. And if you have not yet been giving pediatric vaccines, hopefully to help you persuade you and give you the tools to help you immunize all pediatric and adolescent age groups. A couple of major themes. One is everything that we'll go through. I won't be able to get through all these slides this evening, but everything will be there for your reference. As besides the AAP, the references and materials, the resources that are on the AAP site, the California EZIZ and immunization site has a lot of references, some of which are CDPH references, some of which refer to either AAP or CDC. And between those and other organizations, to hopefully give you, again, the support that you need. Another theme of all of this is that as routine immunizers and as medical homes, you have a crucial role in providing COVID vaccine and being there to counsel and shepherd families through their decision making, and then hopefully decisions to receive the vaccine and protect as many kids in California as possible. Next slide. Again, this quickly lays out the different age groups and compares and contrasts the doses, the dose volumes, and the number of doses in the series for the under 5s, the primary school age kids, and the adolescents. Next slide. This compares and contrasts some of the information that Dr. Maldonado has just presented for the under 5s or under 6s, depending on which brand you're using, the differences in doses, schedules, and the efficacy and safety data that's been reviewed by FDA and CDC over the last weeks. Next slide. So this critical question, where will infants and toddlers get vaccinated? Up until now, with the 5+ years, the primary school kids and above, not only have medical homes played a big role, but other safety net settings and pharmacies have played a huge role. Well, a lot of pharmacies are not able to immunize children under 3 and are not giving a lot of routine vaccines in pediatrics. They've stepped up and given a huge number of COVID doses and 5+ age, but without pharmacies in that role, it emphasizes the importance of AAP, CAFP, and other primary care, pediatric care providers in this effort. Next slide, please. This is Kaiser Family Foundation data from April, different age groups. By the way, along with our slides being posted, and I'll direct you to the chat where, as we talk about a lot of these resources, the links, the hyperlinks to those resources are being posted during the talk this evening. In this slide, in the different age groups, you'll see in the under 5 in the bottom bar, there are about 18% of parents in the survey that said they were the early adopters, that they would be coming to you right away to get those doses. So thinking about the dynamics in the older age groups, where there's the immediate rush for vaccine for those who want to protect their kids promptly, and then a long tail of, in this case, the light blue, the wait and see. Which in April, it was about 40% of parents were in the thinking that they were in the wait and see mode. And these are the families that will be coming to you for primary care and acute care, and with questions and opportunities for counseling and education, and may take multiple visits to get to yes or to get to accepting a dose. Next slide, please. Dr. Maldonado talked about co-administration, thinking about the deferral of primary care 2 years ago during the spring and summer of 2020. And many of those kids have still not caught up with those vaccines. And that as distancing, masking, and other measures have diminished, and we're mingling more domestically and internationally. The importance of catching those kids up on those routine vaccines is especially important, and that co-administration is an option for your families as they come in either for routine care or for COVID vaccine, to think about the full spectrum, COVID plus routine vaccines. Next slide. Just some quick information on storage and handling. Again, all of this will be available for you after. This is the Vaccinated 58 California listing of all the different products. And one other theme of all these slides is the potential complexity of different vials, different colored tops, different colored labels, different doses, and all of this setting up for possible administration errors as you vaccinate. And so to try and help your teams, which are used to many of these issues through routine immunization, but even more so the complexity of COVID vaccination, here's a resource to help direct you through the different Pfizer and Moderna products for your kids you're caring for. Next slide. Storage and handling. If you're not yet providing, do I need ultra cold freezer? No, you do not need an ultra cold freezer. Both products can be stored for weeks at refrigerator temperatures, and that the links on this page and in the chat right now will direct you to, again, the storage and handling summary information. Next slide. A lot of the important information is on the FDA EUA fact sheets. The information has been approved by FDA around the vaccines. These are links to both the provider and the recipient caregiver fact sheets. And next slide, please. So Dr. Maldonado previewed this, that another source of confusion is that the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine was some of the lots were bottled and labeled before the current age and storage information was finalized. So the information on the draft label, which may be in some of your supplies, is not incorrect, but the EUAs and this slide does have the correct information. The two key points here are how many hours after after diluting the product can the Pfizer product be used. It says 6 hours on this label, but it's up to 12 hours now with additional stability data. And then the age indication on the label is also incorrect. So for this one product, there are these potential pitfalls to be cognizant of, and if in doubt, check the EUA, the CDPH, and the CDC and the AAP data for the correct information. Next slide. Just quickly, again, the different color coding between the products. Pfizer maroon cap, 100 doses for minimum direct order through the system, but we're now able to give you smaller orders for smaller settings, practice settings, through our third-party redistributor, either long-term storage in ultra cold or refrigerated storage for 10 weeks. And unlike the Moderna, comparing and contrasting, this is a product which requires reconstitution diluent at a different volume than some of the other Pfizer products. Next slide, please. As Dr. Maldonado mentioned, Moderna 6 to 11 is the topic of ACIP tomorrow, and we'll give you more information shortly as it comes online and as you're deciding which or both products to use in your practice settings. If recommended tomorrow, then Moderna will also be there for throughout the lifespan from 6 months above, as well as Pfizer. Next slide. Thank you. So thinking about this with the labels, the injection volumes, the dilution or not diluting, and with multiple products for multiple ages in your inventory, all of these are potential sources of administration errors. And so reviewing this information with office staff, important to understand the products and to minimize the chance of errors. Next slide. Pfizer trainings upcoming in the next days at these dates and times and links. Next slide. Going on to the Moderna product before the 6th birthday, a dark blue top, a magenta border to the label, also 100 doses per minimum order. At this time, we don't have smaller orders on the third party redistributor. So this is a 100 dose minimum order. Storage either in the freezer until the published expiration date, which is now going into the end of 2022, but may get extended. So you can keep that link will help you keep track of when the doses might expire. Up to 30 days in the refrigerator currently. And this is a reconstituted product that does not require diluent. Next slide. A resource at the link in the chat and the hyperlink below on the slide about reviewing your systems in your clinic and the products to avoid administration errors. Next slide. Just a couple of quick slides on the Kids Vax grant to promote enrollment in the COVID-19 vaccine program. For those of you who might still not be enrolled, this outlines the steps to becoming a COVID provider in California. Next slide. And there is a grant opportunity now to either enroll, or if you've already been enrolled, to get some additional support for additional operating hours, up to $15,000 for 15 hours for pediatric immunization, not just the under 5s, but for all pediatric age groups. Currently, this program is being extended to California Vaccine for Children's providers. But stay tuned in case there are additional expansions of this program to other pediatric care providers. Next slide. The current cycle of funding for up to $10 million in funding has a current deadline of July 15th. But again, stay tuned for both eligibility and deadlines for the funding. Next slide. A couple of quick slides on ordering as we then move on to your questions. Next slide. Again, minimum orders for both products, 100 doses. If you have been ordering vaccine for older ages, the process is the same in terms of the timing of placing orders and receiving shipments. These hyperlinks can help you with the refresher or introduce you to that ordering and distribution cadence. We do have the capability now for smaller practices to order smaller orders of Pfizer product down to 30 doses at a time. And that is starting up this week, or that has started this week. Next slide. This is what the screen looks like in My CAVax for ordering for you or your practice staff who are helping with the orders. Next slide. And then I may just stop shortly after this. The next slides are a large list of a variety of resources to help you with your critical conversations with your patients and families. This is a job aid emphasizing the points Dr. Maldonado was making about the severity and the misperception of that COVID-19 is a milder or an innocuous disease, and this provides information that you can share these and similar resources to help you with your conversations with your families coming in for visits. Similar data coming out of the Vaccinate All 58 and from the state about chronic symptoms, about the risk comparison between not getting vaccinated and getting vaccinated in general and in cardiac symptoms. Next slide for different age groups. A number of resources to help you prepare for infant toddler vaccination as supplies come in this week. Next slide. And again, for your conversations, critical talking points. Dr. Ball and Dr. Panaraj, I'm happy to continue outlining these resources, but also happy to turn it back over to you, depending on timing and questions.
Great. That sounds wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Schechter and Dr. Maldonado, for your presentation and insight to this new and somewhat confusing schedules. One of the biggest questions that we've received from our participants at the time of registration is is there any data that would support one brand over the other? And how do you counsel parents who are trying to choose between Moderna and Pfizer?
Yeah, let me start with that, and then Rob, if you want to add points. I personally again, there is no preference. I actually took a vote of the members of the Red Book Committee, the Committee on Infectious Diseases, and nobody expressed a preference either. And the reason is the way these vaccines were tested are very different. So as we saw, if you look at efficacy, which is the number of cases avoided by vaccine compared to placebo, the efficacy for 2 doses, we never saw those data in full because for Pfizer, because they didn't meet the antibody criteria. But so we're comparing 3 doses versus 2. We know that it could be as good as 80% efficacy, but it's based on too few cases, that is 10 cases, compared to over 100, almost 180, I think, cases for the Moderna vaccine. So it's really hard to compare the efficacy, but the antibody responses are both very robust for both vaccines. Now, the one thing that people have been saying, and I think this is a problem that you can address as well, I'm going to get a 2-dose. Why not get a 2-dose? It's better than a 3-dose. You can't get them back. It'll take too long. But that's not exactly the case either, because if you look at the efficacy estimates for Moderna, they're just about 30 to 50% for 2 doses. So in the long run, many of us believe that we're all going to need 3 doses to really be a primary series. That came up quite a bit at the FDA, that we should stop calling these boosters and just say everybody needs 3 doses. And the Moderna, but that's not an official, that's just my own personal statement. But the Pfizer vaccine, we know with their 3-dose, they got a really good, a huge Omicron neutralizing antibody response with that 3rd dose compared to the 2nd. And that's likely to be the case. So that may lead to more sustained antibody to the Omicron subvariants. Now, again, we don't know that Omicron is going to be around in the fall, so it's hard to really know one way or the other. I would just say in general that it's going to really be up to your office, how you want to supply your office. And Rob, I'll let you talk about that more. What families think about a 2-dose versus a 3-dose series, and the fact that both vaccines are highly effective from the standpoint of the antibody responses that we would expect for all the vaccines, given the experience we have with the older kids, and the likelihood that we're going to prevent serious disease and death based on, what we see with the older kids. And then the last thing is around myocarditis. This is epidemiologically not an age group where you would expect a lot of myocarditis anyway. And in the trials, they didn't see it. But again, that was only about 8,000 kids overall. But we don't expect for this younger age group to see a lot of myocarditis in any event. So that's what I would say. I don't know, Rob, what do you think?
Agree with you, Bonnie, that look at the immunobridging data and those titer levels and the track record to date for protecting severe disease with 2 doses at that level, and looking at the track record of the progression from a 2-dose initial series to a 3rd dose coming some months afterwards. And I would agree with you. I think that's likely even for the Moderna by whether it's 3, 4, or 5 months from now, as we get information from Moderna about their booster trials. So additional doses down the road, initial series with the immunobridging data, highly optimistic about the ability to protect against severe disease. If you're in a larger practice settings and you have families that you expect to come in that will be requesting one vaccine or another, are you accommodating both of those products in the same practice setting or at your neighboring practice settings, directing your parents, or again, if you're carrying both products, preparing for that, or if you're going with one product, being able to talk to the parents about both products and again, at this point, strong protection, as with the older ages, only modest differences between the two mRNA vaccines at the older ages. And at this point, very similar immunobridging data as the primary and strongest point of data going into actual usage of the vaccine.
I want to stress something that Dr. Schechter, you talked about before, is that in this age group, really pediatrician's office, family practitioners' offices, we're going to be doing the vast majority of these vaccines because pharmacies and county clinics probably will not be doing it. So please utilize the resources that Dr. Schechter gave and look at these slides, because it's critically important that we all get connected to be able to have these vaccines in our offices and to be able to give them to our patients. And with that being said, with the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, did the clinical trials show any differences in the side effect profile between the two?
Not really. They were fairly similar. And remember, the dosing is very different. So with the Pfizer vaccine, we originally, with the phase 1 trials, the 2-dose phase 1s, we started off with 10 micrograms, which was the 5 to 11-year-old dose. And that about, again, it was less than 2 to 3 dozen kids, but about 1 out of 5 of them had a pretty high fever with the 10 microgram dose. So the company decided that was just not going to be feasible for vaccinating all kids that young age group. So they went with a 3 microgram dose. And so you're not going to see as much reactogenicity, but really they're fairly equivalent.
Practical question, where can small children receive this vaccine outside of providers' offices? We know that that's a difficult issue. And are the vaccines interchangeable if they go to a different place, one that only has Moderna, one that only has Pfizer?
So the network of providers is similar but more constrained in terms that some pharmacies, independent pharmacies, and fewer sites within many of the chain pharmacies, or it will vary chain by chain to what degree they can accommodate children younger than 5 or younger than 3. So along with that, local health departments may have safety net clinics. The state and state health department and local health departments are trying to provide analogous or similar to the school-based, school-located vaccine clinics in some pre-kindergarten settings or settings where young children are congregating or their families are coming, opportunities there in the community as well to also get their immunization. So that will vary by region and by county and by locality. A similar network, but a smaller network, and again, if you think about comparing, contrasting the early adopters, the parents who know they want it for their kids, and the ones who are ambivalent and will be coming to you with questions. The more times they can, after having those dialogues, then once the decision is made, the vaccine is ready there at the moment of decision in that medical home. The more sites we can get, the better.
Yeah, let me just add that the American Academy of Pediatrics is really, they really support the medical home concept as much as possible, because remember, we're not talking about it today, but we're still well under vaccinated for all our other vaccines, in particular measles. We're down about 14 million doses of measles vaccine in the US. Not that we're not seeing a normal uptake now, but in terms of overall deficit, we're down quite a bit. We're also down quite a bit on HPV. So as much as possible, if kids are coming into practices, it would be a great idea to be able to try to integrate all of the vaccinations together. By the way, there is a question about waiting time, and waiting is still 15 minutes for all age groups.
Speaking of waiting, we've had a lot of questions about the timing of these vaccines. I think a lot of families see a coming wave in the fall when school starts. And so I've had two big questions in my office. One is for kids who are like 4.5 or what have you, a lot of them have asked, should I just wait until they turn 5, then they can have a bigger dose?
No, I'll just say no right off the bat. They should get vaccinated right now.
And then this actually goes for these under 5 kids, but also the 5 to 11s and older who are looking to get boosted right now. Is there any reason to wait until August or something so that they can kind of maximize their antibody loads when school?
Yeah. So those are great questions. So let me just say, I would not wait for anything because you just don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Just by way of reference, I was in Europe a couple of weeks ago, and I'll tell 2 stories about that. One about me and one about a friend of mine. One of my senior faculty like me here at Stanford, texted me while I was in Europe and said, my 2 grandkids and my daughter are infected. My older both of them under 5. My older one is in the ICU on oxygen. No underlying conditions. And the younger one, who was under a year of age, in the under observation in the regular ward. So do not wait. Get the kids vaccinated. There's still virus out there. This thing is not gone. 40% of kids, more like 40 to 60%, depending on the study, have no underlying conditions. So we just don't know who's going to get really sick, and it's still happening. The second thing around around waiting, I thought the same thing for me, because I'm obviously I won't tell you the age, but I'm in a category that should get a booster, 2 boosters. And I was going to go to Europe, and I thought, well, I could probably wait. But then I thought, I just honestly don't want to get stuck waiting. If I get infected while I'm in Europe, I'm going to be sitting in a hotel room by myself if I can even find one. So I think the idea of boosters is, we don't know enough about what's going to happen in the fall. A lot of us think that there will be new variants or another surge that will happen just because winter people start crowding again, but we don't know. We don't know. And in any event, if there is a booster, it's possible, although I don't know this for sure, there could be a Omicron Delta booster. We don't know. That's going to be discussed next week at FDA, and the data look reasonably good. But again, it's kind of a crapshoot at this point. So I think if the kids have gotten vaccinated certainly if they got vaccinated last May, if they're older, and if they got vaccinated in November for the 5 to 11-year-olds, I think they should get boosted for the summer. It just gives you peace of mind to get through the summer, get through summer camps, beaches, all the fun things they want to do without having to get sick. I don't know, Rob, what do you think?
I'm worried both about BA4 and BA5 as these new subvariants are coming in over the next weeks and months in the short term, and wondering what the chances are of another emergence of just as Omicron emerged at the end of last year, from whether domestically or internationally, what those new variants are and what they'll be close or different from. And so I support your call for protecting kids sooner rather than later.
You talked about what families should do if they had a recent COVID illness, and in relation to vaccine. What if they get COVID in the middle of their primary series? What is your recommendation?
I saw that question and I can't remember. I didn't have time to look it up. I can't remember what the recommendation. There is a recommendation, but I can't remember what it is for the life of me. I think you just keep going with the series. I don't think you start again. I'm pretty sure that's what it is, but I don't remember.
Yes. Get through the acute illness. You have the option, as Dr. Maldonado mentioned, of deferring 30, 60, 90 days as you're developing your hybrid immunity with infection and vaccine. But you please continue on and with that second or third dose after getting through the acute illness with or without a brief waiting period.
And by the way, there was a question about intervals, and there's a lot of spotty data about intervals, but the best data I think is in adults from Canada, and that looked at, they actually didn't do the study to look at protection. They were actually doing the study because in Canada, province by province, they had different access to vaccines. They just wanted to see if they could get as many people vaccinated. So some provinces actually vaccinated everybody, certain groups with the full series, and some provinces vaccinated everybody with one dose and then waited till they could get backup doses for the whole population. And so they were able to study interval differences. So and they looked at intervals from 3 to 8 weeks and beyond. And it turns out the longer you waited, up to 8 weeks, you would get a better immune response. But after 8 weeks, you didn't get a better immune response. Now remember, this is pre-Omicron, so we don't know, but it's possible it would have the same mechanism. But if you were at 3 weeks, you still got a decent response, but you had a better response if you waited. And the other thing is there was also less myocarditis the longer you waited, although again the numbers are so small because really myocarditis is quite rare. But the other thing is the Omicron, for some reason, I know why, I suspect I know why, because we're using the ancestral strain for the vaccine. When you get Omicron, your antibody titers just drop right off like a lead balloon. They come down within a month or two. They're really dropping pretty fast. They're not gone, but they're down. Now, that's not to say T cells may not have a role, but we don't really know the role yet of T cells. So I do think that is one of the other issues around getting kids vaccinated is, the antibody titers are going to drop off. And with the Pfizer vaccine, the fact that third dose really got those Omicron titers way up is really helpful, because that means you still can have more Omicron protection a little further out.
We have a few more minutes for like a question or two. We actually started giving vaccine in my office today. It was lovely. We had patients crying. They've been waiting 2 years for this. It was really nice. But I also had 2 families who refused their COVID vaccines, because they were receiving their other childhood vaccines, their MMRs and what have you. And I know you talked about that concomitant use was okay, but for those families, is there a time frame that they should wait between doses of regular vaccines, or can they come back anytime?
So there weren't any data, as you recall. We had this discussion last year, a long discussion about co-administration. And by the way, one of my faculty in my division is the chair of the ACIP. So we just went at it about this issue. I said, we need to we have to co-administer. We do it with every other vaccine. And she was worried that there could be where there were no data. I said, well, we never have data for any other vaccine. And why would this be different? And in the end, so far for the older kids, there haven't been any reports of problems with co-administration. So I would say that I wouldn't even think there would needed to be a particular interval, whatever makes the family comfortable, I suppose, but as long as they come back and get that vaccine. But there hasn't been any data that co-administration in the real world data has led to more adverse events, such as fever or myalgia or other side effects.
In the last 2 minutes, can you give us what you tell the wait and see parents? That those are the hardest. I think they're willing, but they just want to wait and see what happens. What do you tell them?
Yeah, and I'm sure Rob has lots of advice too, but I'll just say briefly, I get it. It's really scary. I have 3 kids, but they're adults. So they went out and got the vaccine before they knew they knew what I was going to say. They ran out and got it without me saying anything. But, we're in a time when, we have been, David Kimberlin, who's the editor of the Red Book, and I, and Sean O'Leary, who's my vice chair, we have been on this from the very beginning. Everybody at ACIP, FDA, we have been watching these companies like hawks. They are doing these trials incredibly well. These are the most well-studied vaccines in the history of vaccines. They have been studied incredibly well. We have so much confidence in the safety mechanisms of surveillance that have been done. So I do think that it is understandable for families to be a little concerned, because it's a new disease, and yes, all of the issues around a new vaccine, but these vaccines have been better studied than anything we've ever had. And you always have to weigh this against the risk of your child getting really sick and potentially There are data that suggests you could potentially avoid, well, you can, vaccination is, by the way, associated with a lower risk of MIS-C. So again, that's rare. And so the thought is that it could also be associated with a lower risk, potentially of long COVID, although we don't have those data in kids. I don't know, Rob, if you have other arguments to make there.
I think as Eric Ball mentioned on his webinar, listening to parents in terms of what specific, is they're making their risk benefit calculations, what are their assumptions about the disease, what are their fears about the disease and the vaccines, and hopefully through this and these resources, having the information, whether it's perception of that COVID is innocuous, and looking back to the Omicron surge and the number of children that ended up in the hospital or perished with a quote milder strain. In terms of addressing the perception of the risk of the disease, and then as Dr. Maldonado has mentioned, in terms of perception of the vaccine and the novelty of the vaccine or fears around the vaccine, what are those fears and what information is available to try and help address specific concerns, allay them, and prepare them for whether it's one conversation or a few conversations to get through their decision-making process.
Remember, you are all the most trusted person in these families' lives. Absolutely. You hold that decision in your hand with them, and you know how to do this. So I remember when my youngest daughter, we were in Chicago for a meeting, and she had a fever of 104, and I knew it was a viral illness, but I was terrified. I called my doctor who was back here home, and he said, Bonnie, you know what to do, and you know you're fine. Just do what you do best. And, I think we just need to reassure one another that we understand how to deal with this. The data are very, it's helpful to have people like Rob and Dr. Ball and Dr. Panaraj and others who really looked at this data over and over. It's all that we do many times. So, but you have that trust because you understand how to give vaccines, you know how vaccines work, and the families will look to you for listening to you and you listening to them and answering their questions.
Dr. Maldonado, Dr. Schechter, thank you so much. This is an exciting but challenging times for all of us on the front lines. We really appreciate your wisdom and advice. As you guys can see in the chat, there are a lot of great links. Most of them are on the CDPH website or the easyiz.org website. And I'll just close by saying, again, if you are not giving COVID vaccines to children in your offices, either as a primary care physician, we hope you please will go to the CDPH and sign up to administer those vaccines. Really, it's important that we are the ones to be able to protect our children. Thanks again to the California Immunization Coalition, to AP California, California Academy of Family Physicians, and CDPH. You guys will get a brief survey afterwards, which is really important for us to be able to put these together in the future about what other aspects of COVID or other diseases that you'd like to hear more information from. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you for protecting California's children. And we look forward to the day where we don't have to do this anymore. Hope you all have a good night. Thanks.